family. It's your sister here, Jocelyn Jones, with another episode of Faith on the Journey. And I am so excited to welcome you to season 3. I've missed you all. I want you to know that I've been thinking about you. I have been praying for you, and I've been so looking forward to our time here together. And I've been working really hard behind the scenes to prepare some great things for you in 2021. And you'll hear more about that as the weeks go on. But let me take a step back. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, we are a place that you can go to help strengthen your faith, to heal your heart, and to find a sense of community. And this show is one of the many ways in which we do this. And you can check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all these other platforms. But in addition to that, we have a number of services on our website, and you can check that out at faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. And today, I wanted to kick off our show by talking about a topic that is so relevant today, and that is trauma. When we think about everything that's taken place over the last year, we have the racial tension that we've been dealing with in this country and collective generational trauma. We have the pandemic that's still raging in our country and in this world. We have the political and civil unrest. And then we have trauma with gun violence and poverty and just our individual lives. And when we think about it, it can feel overwhelming. And I wanted to create a space for us to talk about that, to talk about the emotions and the ways in which it's affecting our lives. But in addition to that, I also wanted to talk about the growth that can happen as a result of the trauma that we've experienced and offer us some hope in that. And I couldn't think of a better person to invite into this conversation than my sister, Reverend Desiree Guyton. And let me tell you, she has a phenomenal background in this area. This woman, she has her master's in divinity. She also has her master's degree in counseling. She is a master facilitator with the Trauma Healing Institute. She helped to create the curriculum on generational trauma, and she's done work on trauma healing, training pastors and counselors in Africa. And that is just a snippet of her resume. And you're going to learn more about her today. But I am grateful to have you here with us, Reverend Desiree. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this time together.
Yes, yes. So before we get into your work, I'm always passionate to learn more about a person's story. What led them to this place in their journey where you wanted to work on trauma? So tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, it's really I grew up in the church. I went to a Christian school and started working for churches full time as a youth director, Christian ed director. And I tell you, my office was constantly full with people coming in with heavy loads. And I kept, you could try to give them Bible and you're praying with them, but I wasn't seeing a level of deliverance that I wanted to see in people's lives. And then I started working in the inner city with youth, and then the Lord really pressed on my heart while I was working my minister of divinity to continue in the counseling. I took one counseling course and I said, "That's it. That biblical counseling course." Like I said, that is the missing component of all the preaching, teaching, standing in front of people that I need to begin to help people to sort through and give them the tools that is both biblical and best practice of mental health. And so that's the journey God allowed me. And I just remember all of the youth ministry meetings and things were blowing up. And I realize now people were struggling with bipolar, they were struggling with depression, and they had trauma that was so complex in their family histories. And I was like, Lord, this is generational, this is complex, and we need as a church to be better equipped to help people and walk alongside of people and helping them with the tools to be able to make some real transformation.
Yes, it is needed. You're right on with that. And I realized this year that a lot of people have not realized the effects that trauma has had on their lives. And so maybe we can start there by defining what is trauma.
Yeah, I like to keep it simple because I think people have made it a lot of ways very complex. But It's when our hearts are wounded, when we experience intense amount of fear and we're feeling overwhelmed to the point of death. So it's fear, helplessness, and horror at the face of death. And we feel trauma. Trauma is a wound, and we got to realize it actually cuts our hearts, and it can begin to reshape our way of seeing ourselves in the world. And so that's why trauma, we have to see what's happening to us, because then when we respond to it, we actually respond in ways we don't really want to respond,
Mm,
because our traumas got us trapped.
Let's talk more about that because you said it changes how we see ourselves in the world, and people might not realize that some of their behavior is the result of trauma. So, can you dig more into what are some of the effects of trauma?
Yeah, and so and you don't mind being a little bit biblical, is that we often talk about sin of what I do, right? And what I do to people, what I do to others. But we don't look at the fact that I've been sinned against and that I live in a fallen world. And so if I've experienced a horrific being robbed, or um, someone creating a sense of fear, being beaten in the middle of the night, or domestic violence, or sexual assault, you've been sinned against, right? And so when you're sinned against, your heart's wounded, and then all of a sudden you are having the inability to manage your emotions. You are struggling with how you see yourself in the world. And see, the thing of the sin that's really devastating is then that we put on the shame from it. And we
Yes.
begin to carry this shame, and shame says, I am worthless. It begins to redefine the Imago Dei, that I am made in his image. And then it starts to reshape me to say, I'm not made in his image. And then I'm worthless. And so that effect then affects me, and then so I have a hard time manage my emotions, how I respond. So then I become more of a sinner, right? I can begin to, the things that was done to me, I start to do to others, because now I'm reinterpreting the world that God has created for us. We begin to act out of our sinfulness from what we've been sinned upon us as well. So then I'm hyper vigilant, I'm always alert, and all those things can affect me. I start to relive the trauma over and over. So those three things: reliving it, um, always being alert, those that's affect us in such in a way that then I become more of a sinner.
Wow, that is deep. And when you describe that for someone who's in it, they might feel like they can't get out of it. It's like this helpless loop, if you will, the cycle. And if you find yourself in that, how do you break out of the trauma?
Yeah, and so there's it's first of all recognizing, because especially as African Americans, or and women, you become, so one of the effects of trauma too is you could be overly inability to manage your emotions, or you could become numb, right? And so these two polars can really impact women, because we can have our children, and we can get married, and you're just kind of coasting along, right? And you're numb, and the thing with trauma is it can be layered, right? And so to overcome it, we have to first recognize we have been affected by it. And a lot of times as women and African Americans, oh no, I could just do it. And you just oh, put your big panties on, and just grow up, and all those things that we say to ourselves to go through it, we either numb, or we're so overly alert that we become fearful. We create a culture in our family of anxiety and fear. So either one is very dangerous. And so it's first recognizing it. Then two is begin to seek help, because Satan beats us up in secrets. Okay, and I want to say that one again, because that's one of my
Say
he
it
beats
again.
us up in our secrets. And so when you're constantly not telling anybody how painful it is, or what happened to me, or that this is happening, my boyfriend's beating me up, And all these things that you're trying to hide and cover, it eventually will pop and it eventually will blow up. It will eventually, and it comes out, and it comes out in our sinfulness, how we talk to someone, how we interact, how we blow up ministries. We do all kind of things. We blow up what we want to do best. We wind up become worse because we are holding this in and we think we got it. I got it. I got it. So the second thing I'm going to say, encourage anyone is, first of all, realize that those reactions and those behaviors is telling you that you can't do it on your own. And so I encourage people to join a trauma healing group and let the secret out in a safe place, and work through all of those fears of when people know my secret. And shame says everyone already knows. So you get social anxiety. I walk in a room and everyone knows that something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with me. And so it's begin to let it out is the biggest thing. Be in a safe place where you can be heard. For some, it's to seek therapy and to be able to process it and work it all the way through and see how you've been sinned against, and putting that sin and shame not on you, but putting it in the right place. And that's a mistake a lot of people hold on to and say, well, if I didn't go in that car, that would have never happened. If I didn't do this, that would have, if I didn't choose this man, that
Yeah,
wouldn't have
they're
happened.
owning someone else's sin, like you were talking about earlier.
Right. And so then you're owning someone else's sin. And so it's being able to say, no, that's theirs. And that shame and that guilt all goes there. And so it's being able to process that and begin to work through that.
Yeah.
So I can go on and on. There's a
No,
lot.
that's a but you're right. I love that you use the word process because it takes time. It is a process and you
Mhm.
are actively working through this. This is something where when it comes to trauma, you have to engage it and it's painful when you do. And you have to be willing to feel these emotions that you might not have felt in a long time. And
Mhm.
Desiree, I mean, you said a earful, and it was so on point. And I'm just trying to recap some of this, but I love, and anyone who knows and follows this show knows I love talking about the fact that we have to be willing to tell our story. We have to be willing to remove the mask that we wear. I call it a mask. You know,
Mhm.
you
Yeah,
talk about
yeah, yeah.
secrets, and that's
Mhm.
something that we've been trained in the art of doing, wearing this mask to cover up the generational trauma that we might have
Yeah.
experienced. And it's so sad
Yeah.
because I've heard countless stories of individuals where they might have experienced sexual abuse as a child,
Yeah.
might have been molested, might have dealt with
Mhm.
all these different things, and they felt like they couldn't talk to anybody about it, including their parents. And then later in life, found out, man, my mother was also molested, my sister, my brother, whatever, my cousins. And so this generational trauma is happening and no one's
Yep.
talking about it. And the
Yep.
isolation is there, the shame is there. We
Yes.
have to break that, and we have to do so in a way that's safe, right? In environments
Mhm.
where there are individuals who can understand the sacredness of your story and guide you through this
Yeah.
process because the emotions that you feel can be very overwhelming, Desiree.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so
Yes.
gently engaging that in a safe environment is what we're going to talk about, and we're actually going to speak to the healing groups that you mentioned shortly. But before we get into that, I want to talk about some of the growth that can happen uh,
Mhm.
even after trauma. So we talked about the negative effects, but I also want to talk
Right.
about post traumatic growth. When I first heard
Mhm.
that name, I said, "Ooh."
Yeah.
That is so interesting to me because we hear about
Mhm.
the negative, but there's growth that can come from the
Mhm.
experiences that we've had. So, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, post-traumatic growth is this positive change that you experience as a result of a struggle or a major life crisis or a traumatic event. So from the event, you begin to develop. Um, you're able to bounce back. You're able to begin to um, not to put away that shame and begin to grow and begin to see that life event is not a death sentence. Instead, it can propel you to other things. So we see this a lot. Like, say, if a parent whose child died drastic in a very all of a sudden now they have a bandwagon and they start a whole nonprofit and they go out and they get all these people and they get the legislations changed That is a post traumatic growth. It's a person who's been working through their trauma and they begin to say, I'm going to make, instead of this impacting my life and sitting in my room and just being depressed, I'm going to work through it and then make life changes. And so it's, so this person, so I have 5 key things. You want me to mention that
Go
here
for
or?
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it has, sometimes people who face this, they develop a sense that new opportunities have emerged, and that's key. That they feel like there's a new opportunity from this. There's a new opportunity, and so they begin to walk through that opportunity. They could change in their relationships with others. So from the traumatic event, they have all of a sudden now they're going to change how they experience. So in order to get to post traumatic growth, I mentioned two so far. Is they start to see the opportunity, right? And then the second thing is they start to change their relationships. The third is that they increase the sense of their own strength. So they begin to grab hold of that, um, with within community, that usually growth happens within some sense of community. You found love and support, and so from that you begin to have an increase of your own strength and ability to work through it. So it's like a rubber band. You've been pulled to stretch, but now you're able to begin to bounce back. And so the fourth is to a greater appreciation of life in general. Because so traumatic events can happen to you. And now from that event, you start to see life is so much bigger and so much more important. And of course, usually what happens is a deeper spiritual connection. They begin to see themselves connected to God in a deeper way, and others. They begin to begin to love God deeper and to love others deeper.
Can we speak more to that? Because
Mhm.
that faith component is huge, right? In helping someone to navigate and move forward and see a bigger picture in all of this. How have you seen faith help individuals in their healing and growth after trauma?
Oh, just because especially when a faith community begins to wrap their arms around people, that's been, like you said, when you start to now, and we've seen this in the last 20 years with stories, people are coming out and saying, hey, I've been hurt, I've been abused, I've been neglected, I've been domestic violence, I've been sexually assaulted. And because they found safety to begin to start talking about it in their churches or in their community, they begin to connect the tragedy to the larger story and realize they're not alone, that they're not disconnected from everybody, that they're not crazy. And so faith becomes so much more important because they realize they're part of this larger, and I would actually say biblical narrative, because trauma is all through the biblical narrative, and they begin to see themselves that yes, I'm God's child, but God is not a glorified Santa Claus. He's not just going to give me this
Right.
beautiful, perfect life. Instead, He's going to take me through this, and then especially when they start to look, I love post traumatic growth as a term, because when you start to grow, you start to realize first that you're not alone, that I'm connected to others, but God has always been with me, even in the midst of the worst traumatic things. People begin to say, Miss Des, when I do this, you've experienced it with me. We do these personal timelines and we do these things, and I've seen people go, you know what? Wow, he's always been there. I may have had this one major tragedy or these couple tragedies, but you know what? Look at what he's done in all these positive things that lifts me up, and all the things that took me through it. And so their faith begins to grow because they realize God has never really left them, but that and He's bringing them through.
Yes, yes. And it's so important to have that understanding that you're a part of a bigger narrative and that you're not alone in your walk, and having that community is essential to helping you on your healing journey. And when it comes to the church, I want to speak a little bit to the
Mm.
importance of the church being involved in this work around trauma. How important has that been in the work that you have done, Desiree?
Man, that's I, I I have to say, America churches need to learn from our third world countries churches. I have to say it. A lot of the trauma work I'm doing in the States now is because I sat with Rwandans who went through horrific tragedy of genocide, and their faith and their understanding of forgiveness and their understanding of building safe places and being there for one another and loving each other through the traumatic um, event that they went through. Um, and so I watched that, and I was starting to say, man, these churches are coming together. They're allowing people to express their pain, create a safe space for the mourning and the yelling and the traumatic effect that they, especially as a country, that they've experienced, and watched how my brothers and sisters in Christ over there really begin to build safe places in churches. And so that motivated me to do that here in America. That's what's the motivation behind Quest Movement's involvement in trauma healing, is the fact that I wanted churches to be able to create safer space for people to truly come in and share, let that secret out. Let Satan stop beating them up in the darkness, and to be the light that the church ought to be. And so my experience has been is when churches do adopt it, it's an amazing experience. I only have a few that's taken it all the way through. It's sad to say, but I mean, when I say few, I have a lot of people who are involved from churches, but to have a church truly embrace trauma and trauma healing and make it a part of the lifeline of the church, my church has done that. And I tell you, it's been amazing journey to walk alongside of my pastor and his wife in how they've put that through for men and for women, and how that's transformed people's lives.
Desiree, that is so on point in terms of what we need to see in the churches in the United States and how we can model from some of the work that you've been doing overseas. We have to make this a priority for us to
Yes.
begin to address the trauma that people are dealing with in our pews. And yes, there's a spiritual component. We cannot deny that as people of God. And not, I mean, even if you don't believe, I'm telling you, there's a spiritual component to this, but there's also some practical things that we need to do in helping people to work through the
Yeah.
trauma, like in creating spaces. We can't just, talk about like, okay, let's just get over it here, let's just forgive, but let's talk about some of the biological things that are happening with people, that the physical things that are happening as a result of the trauma, and how counseling is an important part of this work that needs to be done, and equipping the church to be able to do that, to have these conversations that are sometimes very uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
I think that's one of the hangups, is sometimes the conversations are so uncomfortable that people don't want to talk about it. What's your thoughts
Mhm.
on that?
Yeah, can I just backtrack a little bit to help with
Yeah.
the conversation? I think the
Mhm.
one of the biggest things I think churches struggle with is they're using old methods to they they use old methods to think that that's what solves it. So, for example, I work with, pastors are now becoming trauma informed. The problem with, I don't like the term actually, because I think your information doesn't transform. And what frustrates me is I think we think, okay, we did this workshop, we brought these speakers in, that transforms lives. And that doesn't. The people get information, but it doesn't help them to stop cussing their kids out when they are hyper vigilant. It doesn't, or lock their kids up and don't let them experience the world because they're afraid of the world. Okay. It doesn't help them in those steps, because just because I'm informed about trauma doesn't mean it transformed me. And so what you're describing is, for churches have to understand, Sunday school doesn't do this, right? We have to create safe spaces where people, first of all, can trust the church, and my information is not going to get all over the pew, but that in this small group, and the pastor and the deacons and the trustees, they know how to handle traumatic events. And so it starts at that level too. If one of the things we're working on is how we're going to help churches to consult and work through, do you have a policy on domestic violence? How does a church respond on sexual assault? That when a parishioner comes to you, you don't just dismiss them and send them to a counseling or a nonprofit, but that you're showing them the love of God by you as a church having policies in place to love people who are coming in and saying, this is what's happened to me, and being able to walk alongside of them on a structural level. Then creating these trauma healing groups as well, where they can have this safe place to work through and learn and not just be lectured at. And you've been in our healing groups, you're not lectured at, you're engaging and you're walking through it, and you're going into a small group with one or two people, and you're able to hear their story, and they're hearing your story, and now all of a sudden you're connected because you're realizing I'm not alone, and you're able to walk through it with other people and pray with you. That's private. It's just one or two or three people that may know all the story, not the larger group. And
Yeah.
that's what's important.
That's huge. And the healing groups, let's talk a little bit about that because I've had an opportunity to participate in the healing groups that you offer around generational trauma, and now Faith on the Journey also offers healing groups for people. What are healing groups? And tell us a little bit more about the work that's being done through Quest and the Trauma Healing Institute.
Yes. So we partner with the Trauma Healing Institute. My mentors are the ones who sit on the board and do a lot of advisory and materials for them. And then that's how I wound up in Rwanda. I got connected, and I said, while I was in Rwanda and doing the training and pastors and counselors there, I said, this got to come back home. And so coming back home means is that we got to create these safe places in America, and especially my heart is in the cities of where there's this complex trauma that we have all around us. Kids. I had an 11-year-old kid who saw by the time he was 8 years old, saw 5 dead bodies. Um, he accidentally shot a friend, and you have all this complexity. And he was, because of mom's generational stuff, and then he wind up being molested as well, and all this by the age of 11. And so the complexity
My
of what's
God.
happening in our families and our churches, and we wonder why kids are in gangs and kids are doing. We're not creating safe spaces. And what frustrates me, I got to say something about that part, and I'm going to continue. Is I did a lot of work with gang members, and so many of them sit in our pews. Our pews. They come to church on Sunday morning. They sing on the choir. They on the dance ministry, and we're not creating safe spaces where they can say, "This is what's happening to me at home. This is what's going on." And so when church fails to do that, create these safe spaces. So trauma healing is about, we're in partnership with Trauma Healing Institute, which started 20 years ago, or plus, in South Sudan in Africa, when missionaries realized that they can't present the gospel when all these people have been traumatized. And so it was translated in over 150 languages. This material was put together to help traumatized people to be able to take their pain to the cross, to begin to encounter the biblical text with the best mental health practices combined, and giving lay people the tools to begin able to lead these trauma healing groups. So with Trauma Healing Institute, they developed adult material, teens, and children. Quest Movement partnered with them because they weren't doing it in the States. They weren't hitting the streets. I can't say not at all, but to the level that I like to see it hit. And especially in African American and Latino community. So that was our mission as Quest Movement: is this needs to get in the hands of the poor. It needs to get in the hands of disenfranchised, into churches, the corner store church, who can be able to lead a trauma healing group. And so my goal is to do that, is to bring this to pastors and teachers and camp places that can hold trauma healing camps for kids and trauma healing camps for teens. And so our partnership with them was to bring this to the streets. And then we also developed the generational trauma, because that came out of some of the complexity I was seeing, but also that there's some racial pieces that we as African Americans need to heal. That's part of that complexity.
Yeah, and you helped to create that. You were on the board to
Yes.
create that curriculum. Can you speak a little bit
Yes.
more about the work that you're doing with generational trauma?
Yeah, so generational trauma is this very complex material because it tends to bring, because these are separate fields. There's inherent generational trauma is a whole field by itself, where people look at their generational trauma and see what's being passed down to them so they can interrupt that so it's not being passed down to the next generation. So I love intergenerational and trauma. But when they asked me, they wanted to contextualize for African Americans, I said one thing that the Lord really pressed on me is that we can't heal unless we deal with race. And a part in America, for us, a part of our generational story is embedded in the untold African American story of us as a people who have, we're carrying a lot of shame and guilt from slavery. And we also carry a lot of behaviors from slavery. And I've also, the Lord pressed on me that our white brothers and sisters in Christ need to hear it. And a part of our healing is that they hear us. And creating safe space for Black and white Christians to come together and hear each other's generational trauma within this context of America untold story, and that we can heal together because they're affected too. They're affected by the privilege that they have, and we are affected by some deeper things. So that's where the generational trauma and communication with the leadership at ABS, and we came together as a team. They brought the idea, and it was like, that's right. We need to look at um, generational trauma healing with a racial component.
Yeah, it's yeah, that's so important, and it beyond just dealing with just having a conversation is really looking at yourself and how it's affected you, how it's affected your family, some of the lies that you might have believed or been taught by society about yourself and who you are. It's really powerful to have that space. And so if you were interested, even if you have a morsel of interest in going down this path, it can be very transformative for you to be a part of that conversation. It's uncomfortable. I must warn you, I must give you a disclaimer. You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable with some of these conversations, but it's necessary, as she said, for the healing process. So if you want to learn more information about that, Desiree, can you tell us how we can find out more information about what you all are doing through Quest Movement?
Sure, you can visit our site, questmovement.org. And you, of course, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Actually, those are my personal handles, but Quest Movement has the same handle as just Quest Movement. And also, you can contact me directly. Go on my website. And there's links to the generational trauma. So DesireeGuyton.com will also give you ways to contact us so we can get you connected. If you go to Quest Movement, our website, you'll see a list of trauma healing. Right now, this is a great time because we have three of them across the country at different time zones. And so there's a West Coast, there's an East Coast, there's a Central, as well as a daytime, and there's some nighttime. So there's a lot more flexibility and opportunity for you to. But I want to, for those who don't want to do the racial piece, there's a regular classic trauma healing that's important. If you're just dealing with a lot of trauma, domestic violence, rape, and those type of things, you can take. We also launching the regular trauma healing that's without the generational and without the racial piece.
Good stuff, good stuff. Yes, I love it. This is something I'm a part of the network as well, and so definitely I encourage you to check it out. I love the work that you are doing, Reverend Desiree, and this is meaningful work. And there's a space for us to be able to talk about our belief, our faith, but also the trauma. And so you can learn
Yes.
more by visiting questmovement.org, or as always, you can visit our website at faithonthejourney.org for more information about the work that's being done to help us to heal and address the trauma that we've all been exposed to. So, Reverend, before I let you go, just one final question for you. So, this show is called Faith on the Journey, and obviously that there's meaning behind that name for me. But I want to know,
Mhm.
what does that mean for you when you hear Faith on the Journey? How does that play into your life?
Oh, you know, I couldn't do this first of all without faith, and it's a journey. As a therapist and as a ordained minister, it is critical that not only do we strengthen our faith and that we're on a journey, but that we take other people on a journey or we help walk alongside of a journey of others. I, what breaks my heart is as a therapist who went into homes in an urban setting and sat with women who were broken, and a large church is right over next, right literally, they could throw a stone to a 4,000 seating church, and they look at me and say, "You're the only positive African American woman that's in my life." So we've got to learn to take and go and take our faith to the streets and go outside of our church doors because there's a group of people who are waiting for us to help them come out of darkness into the light. And I can't encourage that more than enough. And I'm proud of you for your faith on the journey and taking um, faith and healing to the and community. That's so important. And I'm looking forward to continuing to get to know you better and all the great work that God has His hand upon you, because we have to go faith on the journey.
Amen. Ooh, I appreciate that. So true. I'm looking forward to us both being out here in these streets doing this important work. And I just want to say for those who have not had a chance to meet Reverend over here, she really does mean that when it comes to being out in the streets, being in the community. She has a heart for this work. She has a heart for the individuals who have been overlooked in life, have been ostracized by society, and she is committed to helping people to heal from trauma. And if anything, I want you to walk away from the show knowing that healing is possible. Trauma does not
Yes,
have to be a life sentence for
that's
you.
it.
You can have post traumatic growth in your life. And God, we know above all things, is a healer and he wants that for you. And I want you to be encouraged today knowing that that's possible. I want you to be encouraged today knowing that there's community and you can find resources. And we mentioned a bunch of them already on this site. Just check out our websites and you'll learn more about how you can connect with people all over this country who you'll find out as you get more involved that we're not so different. There's a
That's right.
lot of commonality in our stories, in our walks, if we are just willing to share and help
Yes.
each other, along our faith journeys. And so,
Yeah.
Reverend, I appreciate you so much. I thank you for the work that you're doing. Continue to be a blessing, a minister of hope and healing for people. And I will be following up with you to see how we can continue to tag team together in this work.
Yeah.
But for those of you who are listening or watching, I appreciate you for checking us out. We have more resources and more great people coming up in the lineup for our season. If you have not already, please subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. You can subscribe on YouTube, our podcast channel, and visit our website again at faithonthejourney.org. There you'll find a number of resources that can help you on your healing journey, and you'll also become a part of our community. So, again, thank you very much for tuning in to the first episode of this season, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Keep your faith on the journey.